In a surprising twist that has sent shockwaves through global politics and business circles, the unexpected shutdown of Israeli businesses across Africa by Traoré has left Prime Minister Netanyahu in disbelief. But how did we get here? And what does this bold move really mean for the future of Israel's influence on the continent? Let's dive into the complex web of international relations, economic strategies, and the surprising rise of one man challenging decades of diplomatic influence. It all began with a single tweet from Traoré, a little-known figure who had been steadily gaining momentum in the political landscape of West Africa. Many had dismissed him as a fringe leader with little chance of shaking the status quo. But as regional tensions with Israel and its economic footprint began to simmer, Traoré saw an opportunity to capitalize on a growing sentiment across the African continent, a desire for autonomy and a rejection of foreign dominance. Israel, with its increasing business presence in Africa, especially in sectors like technology, security, and agriculture, had long been seen as a formidable player in the region. But Traoré was different. He wasn't content with merely criticizing from the sidelines. He understood the power of economic leverage and how a single, well-timed move could send shockwaves through global markets. His announcement was simple yet profound. Israel's businesses in Africa would face immediate shutdown unless certain conditions were met. The conditions, as it turned out, were not just about business practices but also about political alignment. Traoré was calling for a re-evaluation of the ties that connected African nations to Israel, demanding that African leaders reconsider the trade deals and partnerships that had become increasingly controversial in light of the Middle East's ongoing conflicts. This wasn't just an economic move. It was a direct challenge to Israel's diplomatic foothold in the region. As the news spread, Prime Minister Netanyahu's office issued a statement that seemed almost stunned in its tone. Israel's carefully crafted strategy of expanding influence in Africa, including multi-million-dollar investments in infrastructure, defense, and agriculture, was now under threat. This wasn't a minor setback. It was a direct challenge to Israel's strategic interests. Netanyahu, who had personally championed Israel's growing ties with African nations, now found himself in an uncomfortable position. What followed was a flurry of diplomatic activity. Israeli envoys were sent to various African nations, attempting to defuse the situation and convince them of the importance of maintaining strong ties with Israel. Yet, the more they spoke, the more it became clear that Traoré's challenge was not something that could be easily brushed aside. His rhetoric had struck a chord with many African leaders, especially those who had long been critical of Israel's policies in the Middle East and its relationships with certain regimes. Traoré's move was becoming a rallying cry for those seeking a more independent path for Africa, a path that no longer relied on the whims of foreign powers. As the deadline Traoré set for Israeli businesses passed, the economic impact became undeniable. Dozens of companies, from tech startups to defense contractors, found themselves locked out of their African markets. The ripple effect was felt not only in Africa, but also in global stock markets. Companies that had invested heavily in the region were scrambling to find alternative markets or risk losing their African foothold entirely. The closure of Israeli businesses also sent a message to other foreign powers. Africa was no longer just a passive participant in global trade. The continent was asserting its power and demanding respect from those who sought to profit from its resources. However, the repercussions went beyond just economic losses. The move also had a geopolitical impact. Israel's position as a key ally to several African nations had been built over years of cultivating trade agreements, military partnerships, and even medical diplomacy. Traoré's move was symbolic, but it was also very real in its consequences. Israel had to rethink its strategy not just in Africa, but globally. Allies in the region began to ask tough questions, and some African nations who had been quietly supportive of Israel found themselves torn between their historical alliances and the growing movement for a more independent Africa. The shockwaves from Traoré's bold decision reverberated far beyond Africa's borders. World leaders, diplomats, and analysts scrambled to interpret the move's significance. In the Middle East, the news was met with mixed reactions. Some saw it as a victory for Palestinian solidarity, while others viewed it as a dangerous precedent that could destabilize regional relations. For Netanyahu, this was more than just a diplomatic setback. It was a challenge to the very notion of Israeli influence in the African and Middle Eastern spheres. In Europe and the United States, reactions were equally divided. Some saw Traoré's actions as a courageous stand for African sovereignty, while others feared the economic consequences of alienating Israel. The media buzz was intense, with pundits on both sides of the issue offering analyses that ranged from the practical to the ideological. What Traoré had done, however, was clear. He had successfully drawn a line in the sand. Whether or not Israel would ultimately negotiate or push back, the fact remained that the African continent was asserting itself in a way that it hadn't done in decades. As the dust settled, one thing was certain: Traoré had changed the game. His ability to challenge a major global power and reshape the economic landscape of an entire continent was unprecedented. More than that, it had set a new tone for African sovereignty, reminding the world that the continent was no longer a passive participant in international affairs. Africa's future was now in the hands of its own people, and leaders like Traoré were showing that the era of unquestioned foreign influence might be coming to an end. If you're intrigued by the ongoing political and economic shifts happening in Africa and want to stay updated on the latest global developments, don't forget to hit that subscribe button on my channel. You won't want to miss the deep dives and analyses we've got lined up next.